1 week season.
And welcome in, OWS fam. So glad you are with us. We are back in the DFS lab, ready to go here once again, getting you set for this upcoming week 4 slate here on the DFS lab. The purpose of this show, build a DraftKings lineup and use it as a vehicle to talk strategy for the upcoming slate. It's Thursday, September 26th when you'll be watching this, even though myself and Stat will be up here in a sec recording this Wednesday night about 10 Eastern is what it is right now. I'm your host, Cheeseman. So glad again that you're with us. Once again, as always, if you find value here in the content, we'd love it if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Would appreciate that. And with that, StatATL, welcome up. And yeah, man, how you doing? How was week 3? All that good stuff.
Yeah, man, life is good. Week 3. Probably the worst ROI in a couple of years. Thankfully, it wasn't a complete wash, but yeah, I think on my roster review show, I talked about it too. You know, I'm a pick a lane and go 100 miles an hour, and when your lane has some guys that get concussions or just don't produce, it's hard to have a profitable week. So I think I was like minus 70% ROI this week, which was one of the worst weeks for me in couple seasons. So
yeah, I'm right there with you. Just had a lot of CeeDee Lamb, Rashid Shaheed, who, man, it is just almost doesn't seem real looking at his the big fat 0 that he put in the lineups. Seemed like such a sure thing, when I was building the lineups and clicking him into almost every one. But let's take a quick look here though at the lineup from last week. And again, not much to say. We know that it didn't work out here, but this was still highly correlated. But obviously, Shaheed, the 0 from him, it's really tough to recover from that. Any thoughts on this? Or if you don't have any thoughts, you can answer both questions, I guess. Do you view the Saints offense any differently after Sunday?
Yeah, so I guess I'll hit all three. So looking back at the lineup, I don't think there's anything I would have done differently. So on the site, I laid out a case on Tuesday or Wednesday of last week of looking at Devonta Smith and saying, I'm thinking about locking Devonta Smith. And I just kind of made the case of hey, go back and look at games without AJ Brown. You look at games where he's going to get 10 or he saw 10 or more targets. And he was averaging 21 or 22 DK points in those, this is 3 years worth of sample size. And, I just felt like process was just so on point for that. And so he left the game, I think, at the end of the third quarter. And through 3 quarters, he had seen 10 targets and he had a line of 7 for 79. So he had basically had 15 points through 3 quarters. And for those of you who didn't watch the game, suffers a concussion, and then they're without Devonta Smith and AJ Brown, and Dallas Goedert just explodes. I think Goddard ended up with 10 catches for 170 yards, but at least 80, 90 of those yards were in the fourth quarter. So if Devonta Smith doesn't get hurt, he probably sees some more of that usage. It's 1 week sample, but I feel like the process was right. I was basically all in on Jordan Mason too. I think I ended up with 75% exposure to Jordan Mason, just on paper with those, just missing so many key elements. It felt like such a great spot for him. And it wasn't like he didn't see opportunities. He still had 21 touches. It just didn't end. It was the first time he didn't surpass the 100-yard bonus. It was the first time he didn't hit, didn't score a touchdown. Things just didn't break his way. And for the second week in a row, it was a slate that there was one player who was somewhat highly owned in Juwan Jennings, and 2 weeks ago, why am I drawing? It was Alvin Kamara, where they both put up, 40, 50 points. And if you don't have that player, I think Juwan Jennings was 15% owned in most contests. If you didn't have him, you couldn't make up 50 points somewhere else. So I hate it when there's these weeks where, your whole week is really dependent on one player. Even when I have that one player, I don't love those weeks.
I agree. I agree. It reminds me of in NBA when you have like a 3.5K player who is going to get the start because stud is out and ends up going for 50 to 60. It just or a 7K player, or it doesn't have to be a value play like a Kamara, for example, where they go for such a outlier of a score that if you don't have them, you have no chance of. You can still cash in like tournaments if you have a decent lineup, but there's no chance of cashing or of winning a tournament without that play. I do agree. Reminds me of remember there was a week a few years ago where Will Fuller, when he was with the Texans, had like 60 fantasy points. Had that Joe Mixon week. Yeah, those weeks are definitely not my. Week. Yeah,
I think if we had done one of these DFS labs, it would have been a week I was like staunchly against him. This is a terrible play, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, he did not pass the eye test that season. He just looked sluggish, and the line was not good. And of course, he scores. One of the best fantasy games in the history of DraftKings, probably. So that's just how it goes. But I didn't give you a chance, though, to finish your thoughts on the Saints offense. And if we can still view them, as a place to really target going forward after kind of a disappointing week 3.
Yeah, I think I'm not ready to move off of the Saints. They continue to be a reasonably concentrated offense as well. And so, even in a 15-12 game last week, you still got, and Carr had a poor performance, but Chris Olave still gave you 20-something points. Like, multiplier wise, it wasn't a super strong fantasy winning score, but it wasn't a score that hurt you. At 6,300 or so, like if he scored 21, 22 points, I don't have the number in front of me, but like that's still a 3x, multiplier, 3.5x. Like he's not hurting you from winning a tournament. So, and he was one of the 2 or 3 very popular plays along with Kamara, along with Shaheed from that offense. And I think that's going to continue again this week. There'll be potentially Taysom Hill that you could just sprinkle in there as well with him probably coming back this week. And he's super cheap, but in general, they're a very concentrated offense. And, we've seen them produce high scoring affairs 2 out of 3 weeks. So I think we'll kind of see how that evolves as the season goes on.
Yeah. I took that lineup off the screen, but was there anything that you wanted to still talk about with that before we kind of start to look at week 4?
Cheese, if we cash single entry lineups 2 out of every 3 episodes, I'm going to be happy.
Yes, and same here. So looking at week 4, I'll give you a spot that I like, and then we'll kind of go into the lineup building process, and you can also give me kind of the spot you're looking at to attack, and maybe we'll have some some cross sections there. But obviously, you have the games at the top, and I'm not going to like go straight to those because those are Washington, Arizona, Cincinnati, Carolina. Those are spots that everyone's going to be aware of. And not that people won't be aware of this spot, but I do like the New Orleans Atlanta game as a spot. It's a little bit on the lower side of the Vegas totals. Only a 42.5 last I checked was the total on that. And I just like that game features teams with explosive players. Well, we know New Orleans has obviously explosive players with Kamara, Shaheed. The first 2 weeks we saw them have several long touchdowns. And then Atlanta, same thing. They absolutely have those explosive players. I think this is a game that, maybe 65% of the time it probably is going to be a little more of a grinded out, a slugfest. But imagine if Shaheed catches a 70-yard bomb on the opening drive of the game, and then Atlanta is forced to respond. And so just with the players that are in that game, also the fact that people were burned last week by the Saints. They were highly owned. And so maybe people are going to be taking a more cautious approach, and they won't be quite as eager to get their Saints exposure this week. And Atlanta hasn't had a blow-up game yet either, and I'm still waiting for that. Maybe it'll never come, but perhaps it will. What about you? What are some spots that you like as I'm going to pull up DraftKings here, and as we start to talk about it. But what about you?
Yeah, I like that. I like that Atlanta New Orleans game environment. I think I put out my Tuesday thoughts, and I think those are out on Twitter or X.
Actually, I read those. I read those before.
Now, I mean, I think that again, the Saints continue to stay concentrated. I think Alvin Kamara still seeing 20 some odd opportunities, or not even opportunities, like 20 touches every week that they've played. I don't see that changing. So he's a guy I like. And then, on Atlanta, and we might even try to squeeze one or two of these guys into a lineup. I just think at 4,400, like, Darnell Mooney's role is not being priced appropriately. Like, he's out on the field. I think last week he saw his fewest offensive snaps of the season, and he played 93% of the snaps. Like, he's on the field all the time. He's heavily involved in the offense. He's $4,400. Doesn't make sense to me. So that's a spot I like. I mean, I think there are a few different spots for like one-offs that I really like. I think there are some great options. Whether you look at like Chicago, like the Rams have been absolutely torched by wide receiver ones. Like, this is a great spot for DJ Moore on paper, or Rome Odunze on paper. Especially if they're without Keenan Allen, just even more condensing of the targets. So, I feel like there's some really good on paper spots this week. I think one of my favorite game environments is going to be the Commanders at the Cardinals. I don't think that's going to be a sneaky one. I don't think people are going to be like, I didn't see that one coming. But yeah, I mean, I think that, I know last week we built around Kyler Murray. We may do that again this week because, man, the Commanders secondary has just been absolutely torched by wide receivers this it's been 3 games, and they've already given up like 118 yards and 2 touchdowns to Jamar Chase, 127 and a touchdown to Malik Neighbors. And then in week 1, when they played the Buccaneers, like both Godwin and Evans had like really strong games. I think they both had over 20 DK points that week. So it's certainly an inviting matchup to opposing quarterback and wide receivers. And what I love about this environment for the Cardinals, potentially, is that Trey McBride is in the concussion protocol. So they're an offense that was already pretty concentrated. If Trey McBride doesn't play, like, this is wheels up for Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, he's got 19, 20 targets the last 2 weeks. And if he's not competing with Trey McBride, he may say 12, 15 targets in this game. He is just set to explode, in my opinion.
Oh man, you've got me salivating just the way 12 to 15 targets. Sign me up. Before we get into the build, I do want to ask a quick follow-up question. You mentioned the Bears offense, and I was thinking about this when I was putting together a build earlier. What about Caleb Williams? Do you think, if the Bears are in a positive game script, my concern is that he wouldn't throw that many times, and so maybe he's only able to support one pass catcher, doesn't have a big game himself. So is he a consideration, or is it more just one of these 2 Bears receivers, either DJ Moore or Odunze, as more kind of a one-off?
Yeah, I think that it's probably not a game environment that I'm going to build around. Like, I don't mind mini correlations, again, just because like the Rams are super concentrated as well. Like, there's just one screamingly obvious play. He's not cheap. But you saw last week without Nakua and Kupp, like how much they fed Kyren Williams, whether it's, 20 some odd rushes or 5 to 7 targets. Like, they're just giving him the ball. So yeah, I feel like that's a good that's a good game to target for like a mini correlation, because if the Rams are keeping it somewhat competitive, like Kyren Williams is touching the ball 25 times.
100%.
So yeah, I kind of like that. I guess to answer your question, I don't know. Like, I haven't seen it yet from Caleb Williams. I know we like to talk on the site about how a lot of profit in DFS is just kind of being early on things. I just don't know that this is where I'm going to be early on. I have been heavily on Jaden Daniels, like the other rookie quarterback, all best ball season every week in DFS. Like, I'm just going to keep riding that train.
Yeah,
Caleb Williams isn't cheap enough. He's like 800 less or something like that, 1,000 less.
There's just so many other good options.
There's so many other good options. Like, I just don't see him putting up a score that just buries you for not having him. Like, I just don't see a 30-point score out of Caleb Williams. Like, the guy passed for 90 yards the first week. Like, I don't see it.
Yeah. So I got in DraftKings here pulled up. I think this is a contest that you would probably approve of here. It's the $12 single entry, the fair catch 7,300. Does that sound good on entries?
Yeah, I like that. I think I've won this contest before.
I
like this one.
Fair catch 7,500 to first place. That's 10% of the prize pool. All right, Stat, where do you want to start on this, bud?
Yeah, I mean, I love the flat payout structures. It just really just helps with sustainability for you playing for longer. I know some folks. I think high-low, like he's gonna chase the 555 milli. I just can't. I can't get there myself this year. But we have different goals.
Yeah, man. I mean, I do like with this. It's the 2x, just slightly over 2x minimum cash. Rare to see. But of course, we're not going for minimum cash here.
We're not going for minimum cash.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we've really started with a stack every week, but that's what we're going to do this week. And I think let's start with what we talked about. Let's go Kyler Murray. Let's go Marvin Harrison.
Yeah, that game's going to be so popular. Sometimes I almost feel like people can talk themselves out of a really obvious spot just because they know it's going to be highly owned, and so they overthink it. And this is just a spot where it should. I mean, I'm sure there's nuances to this, and there's different ways the game could go. But to me, I love this spot.
Yeah, and I think that there's we'll say what would appear to be more of an obvious bring back, but that's not what we're going to do here. I think that if I just pose this to most daily fantasy players and said, okay, you're going to bring back a Washington piece, what are you going to do? Most people would say, well, let's bring it back with Terry McLaurin. And I think that a majority of people who build a Kyler, Marvin Harrison stack, that's what they will do. Where I kind of want to go with this is I actually want to bring it back with a running back, which I think is somewhat unusual, but Austin Eckler's already been ruled out of this game. So to me, I think this is a really great opportunity for Brian Robinson. Like, I think this is a great spot for him. 6,100. He catches passes. He's gonna touch the ball 20 to 25 times, and he's right there at 6,100. Like, I feel like a 25-point score is well within his range of outcomes.
Love it. Yep, I definitely could see that.
So yeah, I think this gives us a good starting point. And then I'm trying to think of where else we want to go. We talked a little bit about Chicago and the Rams.
Yeah, Bears receivers.
Yeah, so let's let's keep going with that. And I think if we're gonna build a mini correlation around this game, it's 100% going to be with Kyren Williams. So let's get him in there. He's the piece that's touching the ball 25 times.
Yeah,
and then so I think when we're looking at Chicago, we really have kind of two, assuming that we're missing Keenan Allen. I think you're really looking, between DJ Moore or Rome Odunze. So DJ Moore, I want to say up 6,700. What's Odunze's price this week? Got to be in the low fives or high fours.
5,200.
All right, so we only have 4,400 left average salary. Let's go with Odunze. Just kind of see what that leaves us as we continue to kind of build this roster out.
Yes, we got 42.
Yeah, so you know how I like to do? I like to kind of go with a placeholder D generally.
Yes.
So, in going through, I usually identify 5 to 6 Ds that I like different pricing tiers. Usually 1 or 2 above 3,400, 1 or 2 kind of between that 27 to 33, and then 1 or 2 cheaper. So let's kind of go with one that's in the middle, usually around that 3K range. I think my favorite D this week, actually, I think is on the upper echelon of that at 3,300. I love the Steelers this week. I think they were my highest owned defense last week. And so, they're getting a lot of pressure. We've seen the Colts just like not want to sustain drives on offense. So I really like this. And, I think we can double down on this bet. And so let's look at running back here. And let's pencil in Najee Harris.
Yeah, that's right. He's got with Warren. Jaylen Warren is not going to play this week, correct?
Yeah, that's what it's looking like. So, we're kind of on this roster. We're going to bet on both situations where in the past had been somewhat split. Like Najee has been seeing more of the lion's share of the work, but kind of same in Washington with Eckler. Like we're going to just try to capitalize on both running back situations where we're going to expect to see big boosts. So I think from here we've got 2 spots left. But before we look at that, do me a solid and let's swap spots with Najee and Brian Robinson just to make sure that we've got our latest play in the flex.
That's right. The fundamentals right there. You got to have those dialed in.
It's so interesting. I was talking to a subscriber yesterday and he was just talking about the roster review show. And, just kind of the whole point of that is just making sure that we're building good lineups so that when things do break your way, like your roster is constructed in a way that gives you a path to first place. And some of that is just making sure that our latest players in the flex so that, if we nail all the early game stuff, we look and say, hey, maybe Brian Robinson isn't the way I want to go. Like, if there's a super chalky piece in the late game that I can afford, that might be where I want to go to block, a team from catching up to me if I'm way ahead with some lower owned plays already in the early games. So this
absolutely.
is just like 4,100. Not a ton of wiggle room here. But we have one position tight end where you can traditionally kind of punt a little. I think that this may actually work out really well for us just completely out of the blue. So we talked about earlier, like really loving Darnell Mooney. If we plug in Darnell Mooney at wide receiver, does that leave us enough for Taysom Hill? If not, I mean, we can move down off of defense if we have to. But I think it's pretty close. Love that for us. This just worked out where this is a bill that just came together.
Yeah, like just fits together like the pieces of a puzzle or something like that.
Yeah, so we've got like a completely correlated roster here. We've got our stack with Kyler and Marvin Harrison. We brought it back with Robinson. So we've got that correlation, and then all the other spots are filled with mini correlations, whether it's Kyren Williams or Odunze, Darnell Mooney and Taysom Hill, and then we went with the Steelers and Najee Harris. Like, this just came together smooth today.
Now with the Taysom Hill play, is this a play? The tight end position is ugly, and Hilo talked about that as well on the Tuesday show, the DFS Lab. You can check it out, but just not a lot at the top of the tight end position in terms of studs to play. I mean, Travis Kelce, man, how many targets do you have on the season? We have to get into that, but Taysom Hill, like, do you like him just for the potential, the goal line work he could get? Because he literally could get 2 goal line carries and have a pair of touchdowns.
Yeah, I haven't caught the episode with Hilo yet from earlier this week. But so when you look at this slate, what I'm seeing is it's not just the names that are on the slate, but it's some of the guys who aren't and some of the underperform. Like if Trey McBride misses, George Kittle also questionable, TJ Hawkinson, not back yet, David Njoku questionable, like Evan Ingram questionable. Like there's just Travis Kelce really, undecided on what his role is going to be this year. Like on a slate like this, what makes I don't want to call him a punt, but a cheaper tight end more viable is that there's just not as many higher end guys that have to fail for him to be viable. So I don't know. If Evan Ingram is back this week, he's a guy that I do really like at 4,600. But it's Wednesday and we don't have that information yet. That's a game environment that I think has some really great mini correlations. If Evan Ingram plays, pairing Ingram or correlating Ingram with one of the Texans wide receivers, specifically Nico Collins. Like, Nico Collins is one of the 3 or 4 best plays on this entire slate, in my opinion. I just think that makes too much sense. We could have gone with him as a one-off here. We didn't go that that route.
That was the first play Hilo plugged in on Tuesday. So just because he said the looks he's getting, and the type of coverage that Jacksonville plays. So that's the second mention we've had. I'm not sure, maybe Mike and Maximus might have mentioned it from the FanDuel show yesterday as well. But Nico Collins getting some attention here on the DFS lab and just the ceiling that he has. I was going to say, too, with the Taysom Hill play, that's nice leverage, too, because you know that Kamara is going to pick up some ownership. Shaheed probably will, Olave. So if Taysom Hill is getting a goal line carry or two and punching in touchdowns, that's directly hurting your competition because you don't have those players in this lineup.
Yeah, you nailed it. And that just kind of came together for us price-wise as well. But that's why I think it makes sense this week to consider punt tight ends. Generally, it's a play that I generally shy away from, just because a lot of times when you're looking at a 3K, 3,500 tight end, like, what is your real ceiling? Like, the guy goes for 5 for 50 and a touchdown. That's awesome. That's 16 points. But, like, that's literally like a top 10% game for most of those guys. So, like, that's, you're get excited about that. But sometimes that doesn't matter if, you have a guy on the slate like Travis Kelce or Trey McBride and they go for 30. Like, it doesn't matter that you got 15. Like, the raw points just matter so much more. So, yep. I don't know. It's interesting. I'll have to go back and watch some of these episodes. But yeah, to me, there are just some really obvious great spots. I mean, you hit on Cincinnati, Carolina. Like, why am I drawing a blank on his name? Now on IR, like their number 2 wide receiver.
For Adam Thielen. Yeah.
Adam Thielen. So, yeah, so now Deontay Johnson, likely just going to see 10 to 12 targets again. And he's like 5,600 or something like that. And just pairs so easily with Jamar Chase or T. Higgins. Like, these are just easy correlations to make in spots that we just feel like are going to be concentrated offenses in good game environments. Like, there's just like 5 or 6 of those this week. And obviously we only got 9 spots on the roster, so we can't get them all. But, like, yeah, I feel like we hit on some good game environments, and I like what we built this week. Hopefully next week when we're going through this roster, right, we're talking about another cash here, something near the top.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah, a lot of work to be done still, a lot of research to be done. It's only Wednesday for us, Thursday when you're watching this. So, yeah, a lot to look at still, and I'm excited to see kind of how things shape up the rest of the week. So, Stat, as always, man, thanks for the lineup build, sharp thoughts, and appreciate you coming on.
Awesome. Well, I hope to see you and your OWS avatar at the top of the leaderboard again this week.
Thank you, sir. All right, guys, we'll catch you next time tomorrow. Happy will be on. Look at the Friday last look before we head into the weekend. So make sure to catch us then. And until then, Stat, we'll catch you next time, man.
Sounds good.